Overtime or extra time is an additional period of play specified under the rules of a sport to bring a game to a decision and avoid declaring the match a tie draw where the scores are the same. In most sports, this extra period is only played if the game is required to have a clear winner, as in single-elimination tournaments where only one team or players can advance to the next round or win the tournament. In other sports, particularly those prominently played in North America where ties are generally disfavored, some form of overtime is employed for all games. The rules of overtime or extra time vary between sports and even different competitions. Some may employ sudden death, where the first player or team who scores immediately wins the game. In others, play continues until a specified time has elapsed, and only then is the winner declared. If the contest remains tied after the extra session, depending on the rules, the match may immediately end as a draw. Additional periods may be played, or a different tie-breaking procedure such as a penalty shootout may be used instead. The terms overtime and in overtime are primarily used in North America, whereas the terms extra time and after extra time are usually used in other continents. However, in basketball, the terms overtime and in overtime are used worldwide. Association football. Knockout contests. In association football, knockout competitions are competition stages. Teams play an extra 30 minutes, called extra time, when the deciding leg has not produced a winner by the end of regulation or full time. Extra time is governed by the rules of the tournament, rather than the laws of the game. It follows a short break where players remain on or around the field of play and comprises 2 straight 15-minute periods, with teams changing ends in between. In a one-off tie or deciding replay, level scores nearly always go to extra time. In games played over 2 legs, teams only play extra time in the second leg where the aggregate score, then normally followed by an away goals rule, has not produced a winner. First, ties in the FA Cup used to be decided by as many replays as necessary until one produces a winner within normal time, rather than have any extra time, though nowadays replays are limited to just the one, with the second going to extra time if teams are still level. Equally, CONMEBOL has historically never used extra time in any of the competitions it directly organizes, such as the Copa Libertadores. The score in games at ties resorting to extra time are often recorded with the abbreviation AET, usually accompanying the earlier score after regulation time. Ties that are still without a winner or after extra time are usually broken by kicks from the penalty spot, commonly called a penalty shootout. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, many international matches tried to reduce this by employing the golden goal or silver goal rules, but competitions have not retained these. U.S. collegiate rules: all matches that remain tied after 90 minutes have an overtime period. A sudden death golden goal rule is applied, with the game ending as soon as an overtime goal is scored. If neither team scores in the 2 10-minute halves, the match ends in a draw unless it is a conference or national championship tournament in match. A playoff game tied after 2 overtime periods then moves to a penalty kick shootout, with the winner determined by the team's alternating kicks from the penalty mark. U.S. high school rules. High school rules vary depending on the state and conference, but most will have a sudden death overtime procedure wherein the game ends upon scoring a golden goal, although in some instances the overtime will go until completion with the team in the lead after time expires declared the winner. The overtime period length may vary, but it is commonly 10 minutes long, depending on the state. If the game is still tied at the end of the first overtime. As many additional overtime periods, golden or silver goal rules, may be played as needed to determine a winner. After one or more overtime periods result in the score remaining tied, a shootout procedure may be played. In a shootout, the coaches and/or team captains select 5 players to shoot penalty kicks, with teams alternating kicks from the penalty mark in an attempt to put the ball into the net. The procedure continues until each team has taken 5 kicks, or if one side has scored more successful kicks than the other could possibly reach with its remaining kicks. If both teams make the same number of successful penalty kicks after all eligible players have taken the first kick, the procedure repeats. The teams are not required to follow the same order of kickers as was used for the first kick, and may replace one or more of the original kickers. The procedure repeats until one side has successfully converted more penalty kicks in a set of 5 attempts. Depending on the state or conference, the game may go directly to a penalty shootout rather than playing overtime. American and Canadian football. Major American professional leagues. See also List of NFL tied games. The NFL introduced overtime for any divisional tiebreak games beginning in 1940, and for championship games beginning in 1946. The first postseason game to be played under these rules was the 1958 NFL Championship game between the Baltimore Colts and New York Giants. In 1974, the NFL adopted sudden death overtime for regular season and preseason games. If the score is tied after regulation time has expired, an additional 15-minute period is played. The captains meet with the officials for a coin toss, and then one side kicks off to the other, as at the start of a game. Under the original regular season format used through 2011, whoever scored first during the extra period won the game. Additionally, during regular season games, fourth-quarter timing rules were in effect throughout the period, including a 2-minute warning if necessary. In the regular season, if the overtime period was completed without either side scoring, the game ended in a tie. Because there cannot be a tie in the playoffs, the teams would switch ends of the field and start multiple 15-minute overtime periods until one side scored, and all clock rules were as if a game had started over. Therefore, if a game was still tied with 2 minutes to go in double overtime, there would be a 2-minute warning. If it was still tied at the end of double overtime, the team that lost the overtime coin toss would have the option to kick or receive, or to choose which direction to play. At the end of the fourth overtime, there is a new coin toss, and play continues. The longest NFL game played to date is 82 minutes, 40 seconds in the 1971-72 NFL playoffs. On Christmas Day 1971, Miami kicker Garo Yepremian kicked a 37-yard field goal at 7:40 of double overtime. The longest game in all modern American professional football is 93 minutes, 33 seconds in a 1984 United States Football League playoff game, also using the true sudden death rule, in which the Los Angeles Express defeated the Michigan Panthers 27-21. As a consequence of the 1974 rule changes, the number of tie games dropped dramatically. Only 20 NFL games have ended in a tie since then, and just 7 since 1990. The most recent was on the 12th of October 2014 when the Carolina Panthers and Cincinnati Bengals fought to a 37-all tie. Scoreless ties were common in the early years of the NFL, but none has happened since 1943, in part due to innovations added by Hugh "Shorty" Ray to encourage more scoring. In March 2010, the NFL amended its rules for postseason overtime after a vote by the team owners, with the rule being extended into the regular season in March 2012. If the first possession results in a touchdown or a safety, the game ends. If the team with the first possession scores a field goal, however, it then kicks off to the opposing team with an opportunity to score. They can win with a touchdown or extend the game with a field goal. Otherwise, the first team wins. If both teams kick field goals in their opening possessions, or the first team fails to score on its first possession, the game becomes sudden death and whoever scores next is declared the winner. If both teams are still tied after the OT, there will be another overtime period played, and the procedure is repeated until a winner is declared. Except for a regular season game, which would simply end in a tie. There were no overtime games in the 2010 postseason, so the first overtime game played after the implementation of this rule came in the wild card round in 2011. Incidentally, this was also the shortest overtime in NFL history. Pittsburgh Steelers kicker Sean Suisham kicked off and the ball went out of the back of the end zone, resulting in a touchback and no time off the clock. Tim Tebow, then with the Denver Broncos, threw an 80-yard touchdown pass on the first play to Demaryius Thomas to give the Broncos the win in only 11 seconds. In 2012, the new rules were extended to the regular season. The first time the rules were enforced occurred on the 9th of September 2012, the first week of the season, in a game between the Minnesota Vikings and the Jacksonville Jaguars. Minnesota's Blair Walsh kicked a 38-yard field goal on the Vikings' first drive. When Jacksonville regained possession, they failed to gain a first down, losing possession and the game on a failed fourth down conversion. The first overtime where both teams scored occurred on the 18th of November 2012, in a game between the Houston Texans and the Jacksonville Jaguars, won by the Texans 43-37 after both teams scored field goals to start the overtime period. The first overtime game to end in a tie where both teams scored in overtime occurred on the 24th of November 2013, when the Minnesota Vikings and Green Bay Packers played to a 26-all tie. The Arena Football League and NFL Europe used a variant in which each team is guaranteed one possession. Whoever is leading after one possession wins the game. If the teams remain tied after one possession, the game goes to sudden death. This procedure was used by the United Football League in its inaugural 2009 season. The short-lived World Football League, for its inaugural 1974 season, used a 15-minute quarter of extra time, divided into two halves. The New York Pro Football League, a 1910s-era league that eventually had several of its teams join the NFL, used the replay to settle ties in its playoff tournament. The replay was used in the 1919 tournament to decide the championship between the Buffalo Prospects and the Rochester Jeffersons had played to a tie. On Thanksgiving, Buffalo won the replay 20-0 to win the championship. College, high school, and Canadian football. In college and high school football, as well as the Canadian Football League, an overtime procedure is used to determine the winner. This method is sometimes referred to as a Kansas playoff or Kansas plan, because of its origins for high school football in that state. A brief summary of the rules: a coin toss determines which side shall attempt to score first, and at which end zone the scores shall be attempted. Each team in turn will receive one possession, starting with 1st and 10 from a fixed point on the opponent's side of the field. In college football, the possession begins at the opponent's 25-yard line. Under standard high school football rules, the possession begins at the 10-yard line. However, the rule book allows state associations to use different yardage. The 15 15, 20, and 25-yard lines are variously used. In the CFL, where a single point can be scored on a punt, the possession begins at the 35-yard line. The game clock does not run during overtime, but the play clock is in force. A team's possession ends when it scores, misses a field goal, or turns over the ball. As usual, a touchdown by the offense is followed by a try for 1 or 2 points. In NCAA football, starting in triple overtime, teams must attempt a 2-point conversion after a touchdown. Since 2010, CFL teams must also attempt the 2-point conversion after any touchdown in overtime. In college football, the defense may score a touchdown on a play on which it gains possession by turnover. Such a play will satisfy the condition of each team having a possession and will therefore end the game. In high school football, the defense is generally not allowed to score if it gains possession. Although the Oregon School Activities Association adopted the college rule experimentally in 2005, and the University Interscholastic League of Texas, the Texas Association of Private and Parochial Schools, and the Massachusetts Interscholastic Athletic Association use NCAA football rules. If scoring is not allowed if the turnover play does not end with a score, regardless of the eventual position of the ball at the end of the play, the team assumes offense and will begin the procedure from the specified position on the field. Each team receives 1 charge timeout per overtime period. If the score remains tied at the end of the first overtime period, the procedure is repeated. The team with the second possession in one overtime will have the first possession in the next overtime. In the CFL, there is a limit of 2 overtime procedures in regular season games, and if the scores are still level, the game is a tie. But in playoff games, overtime periods are continued until a winner is determined. In American college and high school football, the overtime periods are continued until a winner is determined. On 2 occasions, just 2 plays were required to determine an overtime winner in an NCAA football game. On the 26th of September 2002, when Louisville defeated Florida State 26-20, and on the 27th of September 2003, when Georgia Tech defeated Vanderbilt 24-17. It is possible for a college game to end after a single play in overtime if the team on defense secures a turnover and returns it for a touchdown. On the 9th of September 2005, Ohio defeated Pittsburgh 16-10 on an 85-yard interception return by Deion Byram on the 3rd play of overtime. It is also possible for the defense to get of safety on the first play of overtime, but this would require the offense to lose 75 yards on the play, which is extremely unlikely, and has never happened in FBS. As of 2011, the Missouri Tigers have competed in the most overtime college football games, totaling 14. XFL. The short-lived XFL used a modified Kansas playoff where the series would start on the 20-yard line and have 4 downs to score. However, if the first team to play overtime scored a touchdown in less than 4 downs, the second team would have to score in just as many plays. Neither team could kick a field goal until the 4th down. Although such a scenario never happened in the league's short life, the XFL rules did not explain what would happen should a turnover occur and the set of 4 downs end prematurely. Rather than a coin toss, the winner of the opening scramble at the beginning of the game also got to choose to go first or second in overtime. Basketball. In basketball, if the score is tied at the end of regulation play, the teams play multiple 5-minute overtime periods. In levels below collegiate Olympic play, an overtime period is half the length of a standard quarter, i.e., 4 minutes for high school varsity. 3x3, a formalized version of the half-court 3-on-3 game, uses an untimed overtime. The alternating possession rule is used to start all overtime periods under international rules for full-court basketball, while a jump ball is used under high school and NCAA rules, with the arrow reset based on the results of the jump ball to start each overtime. The National Basketball Association and the WNBA, which uses a quarter possession rule to start periods after the opening jump, also uses a jump ball in 3x3, whose current rules do not allow for a jump ball at any time in the game. The first possession in overtime is based on the result of a pre-game coin toss. The winner of the toss can choose to take possession of the ball, either at the start of the game or at the start of a potential overtime. The entire overtime period is played. There is no sudden death provision. The only exception is in 3x3, in which the game ends once either team has scored 2 points in overtime, with baskets made from behind the three-point arc worth 2 points and all other successful shots worth 1 point. All counts of personal fouls against players are carried over for the purpose of disqualifying players. If the score remains tied after an overtime period, this procedure is repeated. As many as 6 overtime periods have been necessary to determine a winner in an NBA game. In exhibition games, it is upon the discretion of the coaches and/or organizers if an overtime is to be played, especially if it is a non-tournament game. Starting in the 2009-10 season, EuroLeague Basketball, the organizer of the EuroLeague and EuroCup, introduced a new rule for two-leg ties that eliminated overtime unless necessarily to break a tie on aggregate. The rule was first used in the 2009-10 EuroCup quarter-finals, although no game in that phase of the competition ended in a regulation draw. EuroLeague Basketball extended this rule to all two-leg ties in its competitions, including the EuroLeague. In 2010-11, one game in the qualifying rounds of that season, specifically the second leg of the third qualifying round tie between Spiru Shalwa and Alba Berlin, ended in a draw after regulation. No overtime was played in that game because Spiru had won the first leg, although other competitions used two-leg ties at various stages. The EuroLeague basketball competitions are the only ones known to use overtime only if the aggregate score after the second game is tied. Ice hockey. Ties are common in ice hockey due to the game's low-scoring nature. If the score is tied at the end of regulation play, certain leagues play overtime. NHL. If a game is tied after regulation time, the teams play in a sudden death 5-minute overtime period, with a goaltender and 3 skaters per side. If regulation time ended while a power play was in progress, the team with the advantage will start overtime with more than 3 skaters, and maintain its advantage for the duration of the penalty if no one scores. If nobody scores in the overtime period, the teams engage in a penalty shootout, where 3 skaters, selected by the head coaches on the teams, go one-on-one against the opposing goaltender, taking the puck at center ice for a penalty shot. Quote, if the shootout remains tied after the initial 3 rounds, the shootout continues in a sudden death fashion. No player may participate in a shootout twice unless the entire active roster has been exhausted. The greatest number of shooters in a single shootout was 40 during a game between the Florida Panthers and Washington Capitals. Panthers player Nick Bjugstad gave Florida a 2-1 shootout and game victory on a trick move. The 5-minute overtime period was introduced for regular season games beginning with the 1983-84 NHL season, but with teams at full strength on the ice. Overtime in the regular season was reduced to 4 skaters a side starting in the 2000-2001 season. The shootout was introduced for the 2005-06 NHL regular season. Previously, ties during the regular season were allowed to stand if not resolved in overtime. Starting in the 2015-16 season, overtime was reduced to 3 skaters a side. NHL. Following an intermission, multiple full 20-minute periods are played. Teams remain at full strength unless this is affected by penalties during the third period. A goal ends the game in sudden death if neither team scores. This procedure is repeated after the intermission. The teams change ends after each period. This has made for lengthy games in the history of the NHL playoffs, with some games going as far as 5 or 6 overtimes before the deciding goal is scored. NCAA. If a game is tied at the end of regulation, the teams play a sudden death 5-minute overtime. Both teams play at full strength, unless affected by penalties. If neither team scores during overtime, the game ends in a tie. NCAA. For tournaments held during the season, in which advancement or determination of a champion is necessary, organizers have the option of either using the postseason overtime procedure or using the regular season procedure followed by a penalty shootout. Statistics from a shootout are not counted by the NCAA, and a game decided by a shootout is considered a tie for NCAA tournament selection purposes. NCAA. Same as the NHL overtime procedure above, except that overtimes are played with the teams defending the ends of the ice that they would as if they were starting over, and repeat that pattern every 3 periods. Games decided in overtime are considered wins or losses rather than ties, regardless of how many overtimes are played. International. As of the 2007 IIHF World Championships, the IIHF instituted the 3-point rule, which not only awarded the winning team 3 points for a regulation win, but awarded them 2 points for a win in a 5-minute overtime period or a game-winning shot. Games in IIHF round robins can therefore no longer end in a tie. In the World Cup of Hockey in 2004, the NHL's tie-breaking procedure at the time was followed. There was a 5-minute sudden death period at 4 skaters per side, and if the score remained tied after the overtime period, it stood as a tie. The game between Sweden and Finland ended in a 4-4 tie after 65 minutes. The 2016 World Cup of Hockey will have the new NHL tie-breaking procedures. In round-robin play, 5-minute sudden death period with 3 skaters per side, plus best-of-3 round shootouts and extra rounds if needed. International. Various tie-breaking procedures have been used for international tournaments, with all of them save one following a common theme. 1 period varying in length of sudden death overtime followed by a shootout of 5 skaters per side. The length of the overtime period has varied between 5, 10, and 20 minutes, and 5-on-5 and 4-on-4 formats have been used. The most recent format used was at the 2010 Olympics. There were 20 minutes of 4-on-4 followed by a shootout. In 2006, it was 20 minutes of 5-on-5. All men's games ended in regulation during the medal rounds, while the women's semi-final between the United States and Sweden required a shootout to determine the winner. At the World Cup of Hockey in 2004, the NHL's post-season tie-breaking procedure was used. The only overtime game in the playoff round was the semi-final between the Czech Republic and Canada. Canada won 4-3 with a goal at 2:16 of overtime. The 2016 World Cup of Hockey will have the same overtime procedure as the 2004 event. Handball. When a tie needs to be broken in handball, 2 straight 5-minute overtimes are played. If the teams are still tied after that, this overtime procedure is repeated once more. A further draw will result in a penalty shootout.